Hi, I'm Rob Price. Welcome to Keepers of the Green, my new podcast about people who are passionate about plants and gardens. So welcome to the second of the three-part series around Haworthias and talking to Gerhard Marx and other guests. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Allan Rollasson. And we're going to talk about something that Gerhard talks about in early on in terms of this link between the work of hybridisation and art or creativity and design. Let's hear from Gerhard.
Being mainly a visual artist, it was primarily also a visual attraction with these living decorated jewels that was at the basis of my interest that later grew into field research and taxonomy and hybridization in cultivation.
And Allan, if you could start by introducing yourself and a bit about how you were inspired and got involved with Haworthias, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, Allan Rollason. I've been involved with Haworthia, I think certainly probably the last 50 years, possibly. Fascination with a small succulent. First of all, probably got involved with a few cacti that found in garden centres and whatever. And it really started for me when I visited a cactus show in Birmingham, part of the BCSS. And my wife said, "Oh, there's a cactus and succulent show on in Sheldon, a suburb of Birmingham." Anyway, cut a long story short, we visited it. And one of the plants that I happened to be looking at was Haworthia truncata, a big, what we call washing up box-sized plant. And that's where it all started. Met the secretary of the Birmingham branch, who was one of these characters that immediately invited you to join the club, so to speak, which the following day on the Sunday morning, he'd invited me to his greenhouse. And like a lot of these people in those days, I came away with lots of bits and cuttings and whatever, and half of it, I'm sure, died very rapidly. But that was really the beginning, seeing this amazing plant, this strange plant that looked as if somebody very carefully cut the ends off all the leaves. Was totally fascinated by it. And that's really where it started. And as sort of time progressed, there were a few people who had talked about Haworthia. Very few people collected those plants because in those days there was very little material available. But then a nurseryman appeared on the scene, certainly my time, a guy called Tom Jenkins had a nursery over in East Anglia, and he was a character, but he started to source Haworthia from South Africa, which in those days really was a first, and he made them available. Now then, at around the same time, a gentleman in South Africa, who I think most people associated with Haworthia will know, and that was Bruce Bayer, and he produced a book on Haworthia. And again, having bought a copy of this book, found it available, bought a copy, it had colour pictures in. Now, this is the first time I'd seen what you could term wild plants in colour. One particular plant of Haworthia springbok vulkensis had a blue hue to it. I mean, I'm sure it was more to do with the printing than the actual origins of the plant. But it absolutely sort of blew my mind that there's this amazing sort of blue coloured plant in the species. But there was, again, a lot of detail about the plants, where they came from, what the habitats looked like. There was so much information there. And then, of course, around that time, there were new people certainly to me and most of my friends started to produce um, publications. There were a number. I think there was a guy called Scott, but there were other people who produced some very, very attractive publications with smashing pictures, and of course we were starting to see some of these plants in this country. There were other people around at the time who'd visited South Africa. Derek Tribble immediately springs to mind, because again he made pictures available with his talks that he gave around the branches of the BCSS. And I suppose it was those sort of times when I made contact with people in South Africa personally. I think one of the first people I spoke to in South Africa was Coty Retief, who's sadly no longer with us. Coty ran a nursery called, I think it was Garip or something like that in those days. But he was so friendly and helpful. And again, we were able to acquire plants from there. Another nursery, which I did visit some years later, was Sheelam's. And if I look back now and think about the sort of material that was available then, yes, it was coming in from South Africa. It was propagated material. But I think obviously the laws and all the regulations, were quite lax in those days compared to what they are today. But the material that we got in from Sheelam's was definitely seed raised. The plants were, I don't know, 2-3 millimeters across, if that. I mean, they were tiny, tiny little seedlings. I have to say, an awful lot of them actually didn't survive the trip. So, we were really pushing the bounds. I had friends, we would sort of club together and order some of these plants just to get hold of the material. Of course, we're really spoiled today with the material that's available. Again, Gerhard produces fabulous hybrids for us. Which which are available to us these days, and of course the big source is the Far East. The skills that they've got in producing this material is great.
So we need to. Well, actually, first thing to say, how weird that I had a presentation in Nottingham BCSS group this week about, amongst other things, Sheelam's. So I kind of saw a bunch of pictures from it. So that's a coincidence. But I have the advantage of seeing you sat in a room with lots of drawings and paintings on your wall, and this episode was very much around the art of Haworthia, the art of hybridization. So can we make the? I know that you do that. I've seen your book, but for those listening, can we also add on the how did that come about? What was
How did it come? Well, first and foremost, I suppose I've illustrated particularly plants. I enjoy illustrating plants. I also do lots of animals. Where did it stem from? My father was actually what's termed a commercial artist. How I would describe him, he had a God-given talent. And what I always tell people is a little bit of my father rubbed off on me. Having said that, when I was a child, I think it was father wanting to sort of point his son in a particular direction. He would make me draw alphabets to make sure that I understand typography, which I always think back now and I think, what a complete waste that was. But I enjoyed the sort of relaxation part of of producing artwork. It stemmed in terms of Haworthia, really as much as anything from COVID. We had a lot of spare time during the early part of COVID when we were all sort of all having to stay at home. Um, I've got a big collection of these plants and started to do some little illustrations of them. Um, Again, I think I'd always sort of dabbled in it, never really shown anybody what I was doing. But with COVID and having friends in the hobby, I would do a picture and then I'd send it to some of my friends to have a look at. And as time progressed, they said, "Why on earth don't you put it together in a book?" So that was how the book originated. It was from that sort of, why don't you? Um, the fact it took me another 3 years to complete a number of illustrations. Further, going a little bit further back than that, one of the trips that I took to South Africa, I was fortunate enough to go with Jakob Mickey from the Czech Republic, and some other friends. And my whole sort of interest, having had this passion of these plants, and go with somebody to South Africa, like Jakob, who knew where to find these plants. It's certainly a skill, I can tell you. But from that point, I took again, Jakob guided me as to what sort of camera I was going to buy a new camera to go with it. So he was happy to do that. My whole aim was to take photographs that at some point in the future, maybe I could do an illustration of. And I had that in mind all the way through. Having also seen artwork from Gerhard, I'm fortunate enough that I actually own some of what I consider to be fabulous pictures that Gerhard made available to us in the UK, and corresponded with Gerhard as well. So with that in mind, again, I'll come back to a little bit to do with people. The passion when you're talking to these people, almost it gives me it gives inspiration to want to do something of a level that I'm proud of and other people would appreciate. I think the other thing I always say to people, I always do my best work in the winter when I can't do anything. I've got nothing else to sort of take my mind. I enjoy growing things. I've got a massive vegetable garden. I'm fortunate, got a polytunnel, so there's pretty much anything I can grow. I have the facility, but the passion sort of it becomes more intense when I'm in this sort of winter time when I can't do anything else. And somehow you just become part of the picture that you're doing. I know it's a weird thing to actually say, but I'm almost going to another world because you concentrate the method or the artwork that I produce is really intense. I'm almost going inside the plant somehow. And I know it's a weird thing to sort of try and describe, but you become part of that picture. When I look back at them, it sort of brings back that I'll put it, a happy time.
Yeah.
So that and that's the motivation for me, really. Just to want to produce something that I'm happy with. If other people enjoy it, fantastic. But it's for me.
I think the affinity I get completely. I've always been a photographer, so I would always kind of be looking at light and composition, inspiration of a design. I used to work with very narrow depth of field, so I was looking to create something that was perhaps more art rather than representative of the thing that was in front of me. Now, these plants we know can look different. They look different because of light. They look different because of the conditions in which they're growing. So I'm kind of intrigued by, are you drawing or painting the representation of the thing that you saw, or do you evolve it sometimes to be the thing that you wanted it to be?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true to a very large extent. I mean, I think if you've got an interest like we've got in these small succulents, and I'm looking at them almost. I mean, obviously, I'm retired now. I'm getting a bit long in the tooth, as they say. But I've now got some time. I mean, I had a very intense job. I ran my own company, and fortunately, it was quite successful. I traveled the world for, again, that was a big part of what I did. Um, all of that, I still found time to grow my plants. Still had that passion all that time. So, I've been retired now, what, 9 years. In those 9 years, it's true what they say that I'm busier now than I ever was before. I don't know how, but I find the time to spend with the plants, and you see the plant change, not just through the condition, but through the time of the year. Plants are now at this time, we're talking about sort of a late spring now, I would call it, because our weather's patterns changing. But we're already starting to see a massive change in colour. The plants are coming alive. We've got flower spikes everywhere. Um, they're continually changing, and I look at plants that maybe I bought as a mature plant already, put it in a pot, and I'm seeing that plant overlapping the pot within a very short space, so it's growing, and it's all that observation. You're seeing colour changes, so you're seeing the plant actually evolve. You see a plant start to lean sometimes. I've noticed one, funnily enough, this morning. A plant started to lean, and I found an offset developed on the opposite side of the plant. How fantastic is that? You've gained another little plant, but you've got to make the decision now is to do you take it off and put the original plant back in its right plane, shall we say, or do you leave it? I think again yesterday I've been again what I would consider to be quite a difficult plant to grow, but I've been quite successful with it. It had produced a number of offsets, and I've been threatening to take the offsets off for some time because the plant was starting to look untidy in my eye, having seen it in habitat and observed a number of photographs from other people of it in habitat. It's a single solitary plant, a single head. So it doesn't look right somehow in cultivation that it's got all these offset, and they're all lopsided, and I took them all off yesterday.
It's always the dilemma, though, isn't it? Because uh, uh, I mean, it comes back to, I guess, the eye of the beholder and design ethic and things like that. But in many shows, many plants, it's all about maturity and size and difficulty of growing the plant. But the way that you might want to look at some of these plants, as you say, is not as, I mean, I've literally got a big clump of Haworthia on my study desk, which is still at the moment in isolation before I put it in the greenhouse. It doesn't look great as it is. Therefore, what do I do with it to kind of make it look more impressive? I have a question though, which is, I associate you with one particularly plant, which is probably because it was on the front of your book. But if you were to pick the plants that most inspire you,
Oh,
whether they
goodness.
be hybrids or whether they be um, just a species that you just love the design of it, the way it's been, nature has put it together, what would they be?
Oh my goodness, what a question. I mean, I think there are so many plants that people do associate me with. I mean, I think the one above anything is truncata. And again, fortunate enough to have been to quite a number of habitats, different habitats of truncata. The thing that gets me about it is the difference in cultivation from the plants in habitat. I mean, they are totally different. and particularly with all the cultivation that's taken place in recent times. There are some absolutely spectacular plants. They're nothing like the plants that we see in habitat. So which do I like the most? I would still have to go back to the habitat. And I think that still applies with everything else. I mean, I having been fortunate enough again to go to the habitat of splendens, which, I mean, the name suggests, and it's absolutely right. It is the most stunning plant, and being part of, if you like, trying to save the habitat of that plant, which I'm very proud of through the Haworthia Society and the BCSS funding it, and I managed to go there some time after the fence had been erected around it, just so that people are aware the reasoning why there is a fence around it was that the plants were literally being ripped from the ground by an imbalance in wildlife. And so again, it was people like Gerhard that brought it to, shall we say, international attention, and we were able to preserve it. And I'm told that plants are doing incredibly well. I think a friend of mine, Ian, visited it last year. He was fortunate enough to go and see. But to see those plants in habitat, the pictures that I was able to take, I shall never. I can see them now in my mindset. They were so beautiful, and again, where they should be. Hopefully, they'll be protected. So it's a very difficult question to answer, because then I go on to Pumila, to Lister. It is now termed not Haworthia. Again, in habitat, absolutely fabulous colours that we probably can't achieve, certainly in this part of the world.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, one of the points that Gerhard makes is very much from thinking about hybridization to start with great plants. In a sense, if you want to create something amazing, then you kind of start with something amazing and put them together to kind of then see what happens. Gerhard has a very specific method for visualizing a hybrid before it exists, and the way he describes it is more like a painter mixing pigments than a scientist crossing specimens.
In terms of hybridization, the main thing is to select your best clones. For example, if you use a plain-looking dull green Haworthia bardia, and you cross it with a splendens that is sparsely flecked, the result may not be nearly as exciting as when you select your best bardia with strong facial lines, and you cross that with a white, dense white flecked splendens. And that is throughout a matter of trying to visualize the results. For example, the Japanese Haworthia splendens Shikinyo cultivar is very beautiful, but in general, what makes it special is the nice large chocolate flecking in the leaves. But the rest of the leaf generally is dark green, so the chocolate markings don't show off as attractive against the darker leaf surrounding it. But if one cross that with a very white leafed, for example, Lombard star type hybrid, then some of the seedlings will inherit the nice chocolate, bold chocolate flecking of Shikinyo, and the surrounding leaf will then be white, which shows off the contrasting pattern so much better. And in terms of leaf shape, that is also the same. If one have, for example, a beautifully flecked little hybrid with nice patterns, but it's small and semi-erect leaves, you will choose a larger leafed hybrid with more flattened recurved leaves to cross it with, and in the hope that the combination of characters will yield a much more attractive plant. And generally, there are some of the seedlings will be very close to one's initial visualization, but then some won't be, and then on the other hand, there are always some really surprising, results that one could never have imagined in your wildest imagination. That is what is making this hobby so rewarding. As Stephen Hammer once said to me, he said, as an artist, there are much quicker ways to mix colors and shapes, but none nearly as fun as this.
But amazing is, again, it's always perspective, isn't it? Because what I might consider amazing, I mean, I had this conversation with Ian on the previous call because Ian was very enthusiastic about Truncata, and there was me bouncing around Reinwartii in terms of Haworthiopsis. We just kind of look at different things.
Yes, yeah, and I think when you look at other genus of plants, I don't think any of them have such a broad sort of visual appearance that they're all part of the same genus. Like you say, okay, they've been split a little bit now, but Reinwartii, some of those plants, when you see specimen plants that have been grown well, you want to see them in habitat with all the colours that that appear there. I think that's the thing that sort of I think intrigues as much as anything is the diversity of form that we've got in Haworthia. It's fantastic.
And I think in a sense the appeal and maybe that diversity and that ability to create. I mean, I think what I found for fascination in plants over decades, from my point of view, is yes, there are always those who love species, and there are those who love hybrids, and there are those who kind of love maybe both sometimes. But maybe Haworthia is that kind of space of there is so much variety in all of those that there's something for everybody. Gerhard has a very particular view on the relationship between wild plants and cultivated ones, and it's not one that you might expect.
I saw many times that when you can collect a relatively plain-looking plant in the wild, and in cultivation it soon started changing, and it becomes more beautiful, almost always. If you collect, for example, Haworthia picta with relatively dense flecking, after 2 years in cultivation, it will become a much denser and more attractively flecked plant. And I guess this is to some extent that the plants don't want to display their full potential, beauty potential in the wild, as they don't want to attract attention. So they deliberately inhibit their beauty. During one Congress talk, Stephen Hammer referred to this phenomenon as that these plants were almost predestined for cultivation, which horrified some nature conservation officials in the audience. But I agree with what Stephen said. It's the moment you have a plant in cultivation, it basically becomes a cultivar. But the saving factor, I guess, in the terms of Haworthias is the total chaos in terms of the taxonomy. I mean, some people reckon there are only 6 species, and others reckon there are 160, and then you have someone like Hayashi who have a species list in the 800s, I think. And so I think that is a advantage and disadvantage when it comes to Haworthia taxonomy. But fact remains, whether you're a hybrid creator or a purist, the fact that you are producing beautiful plants that are commercially available, it reduces the pressure on the wild. And so I cannot emphasize enough that people who do keep the collections be as productive as they can with these plants. I have this personal policy that if I have a plant on a greenhouse shelf that flowers repeatedly and I don't get around to pollinating it and producing it from seed, then I give it away or sell it because I feel then that I don't deserve it.
Yeah, and I sort of having been involved with that passion for so many years of my life, it's all the things that we've gone through, if you like. I mean, going back to the difference between hybrids, the hybrids that were being produced, let's say 50 years ago when I first got involved with it, we used to call them cabbages. They were invariably forms of Cooperi or Cymbiformis. They were always put under the bench. I've been to see some, people sadly no longer with us, but their collections maybe 30, 40 years ago. They were well known in the hobby, but all their Haworthias were growing under the bench. And so when they brought them out, there was so much sort of green flesh. They weren't particularly attractive at all. We've learned from that to a degree, because when you grow them, shall we say, on the top bench, grow them a bit harder, give them a lot more light, they are incredibly beautiful plants. They weren't that particularly attractive, when they came from under the bench. But there were other sort of things that I recall, and they were sort of the wrong information. When we first saw some of the things like splendens, they didn't come to us as splendens. They came to us of some form of retus, possibly Argentina Mac. But also at the same time, we were led to believe that these were hybrids that were being produced in the Far East. And in those days, it was primarily Japanese hybrids, but they weren't. And then, of course, a little bit later on, I think wrongly, to some extent, these so-called hybrids, which we now know as splendens, had been sort of taken from habitat, and that's why there were so few in habitat. I don't sort of go along with that, but it's all these misnomers, incorrect information, but it all sort of built up this interest in me that wanted to see these plants in habitat, and so I'll always lean, I think, to the wild plant. That's where I see probably more beauty. I mean, I've got some stunning hybrids, and again, I think probably one of the most beautiful plants I've ever seen is a hybrid that Gerhard produced a few years ago, and it's been named after, again, a good friend of ours, which is Bill Keane. I think you've seen pictures of that plant. If you haven't seen the plant,
I've seen the plant in Leicester.
Oh, good. Okay. I mean, that has to be new, but I'm sure there's an awful lot of splendens in that DNA of that plant. I'm pretty sure of that.
I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, in the sense that when you look at hybrid, it's almost that kind of ability, given the experience that you've got, to then break it down. You can
Right.
identify some of those kind of
Yeah.
things
People,
that fed
and
into it.
again, I think, because you can cross these plants. I mean, I think the sort of big thing at the moment, Colmaniorum hybrids. Again, it's a fantastic image of a plant in itself. It is the most beautiful plant when grown well. Again, it's more freely available. I think going back in time, we were always concerned, the plants would be constantly being taken from habitat. I mean, propagation and seed raising and everything it's more of a science today. And of course, it just isn't necessary to take anything from habitat, really. We can just take, some seed pods and away you go. But yeah, it's all of that. It's just it's the imagery that I've got in my head of seeing these wild plants, where they've evolved, pretty much, to see any of them. I mean, even I think I almost cried when I first saw Lochwoodie in habitat, and right next to it, and it's only a small sort of area that it's found. Certainly the original locality. I think there is a new locality that's been discovered not too far away. But there were astrolobas growing next to it, and they were the most beautiful thing. But then you'll find a crassula, or you'll find another succulent. So it's just wonderful, really. I mean, how to lose yourself, in an interest.
It's maybe also that combination of things, and I mean, I smile because kind of in my greenhouse I've now got a growing small astrolabe collection, sat next to my growing Colmaniorum collection, etc. So interesting to have picked on those. One last question, which I guess touches on something you kind of talked about there. As you say, there are pockets globally of interest in hybridization and in Haworthias. You mentioned the Far East, clearly kind of South Africa, the UK, but there's people dotted around the world.
Oh, yeah. I mean, one of the best ones that I'm aware of, and have known for many years now, is George Theodorus. Probably known on the planet as Prickly Pete. I don't know where that originated from, but what a fantastic grower that George is. And there's some great growers in Europe. I mean, sadly, we've lost one or two in recent times. We're all getting old, but yeah, I think to me it just shows the love and the attraction of these plants. It's worldwide.
Gerhard has a very specific take on ego in hybridization, and it's one of the things that gives him a distinctive voice.
The real fun comes if one uses hybrids made by other people and cross it with your own. And the beauty of the complex hybrids are just incredible. I will always be grateful to two Japanese people. The one is Dr. Ayashi, and the other one is Yu Hanai, who have both been very generous during the early 2000s for sharing their hybrids with me, which I could use to create my own further mixtures. And then the other thing is they are don't be too hasty to give a name to your hybrids. I mean, what I'm basically saying is wait until you have a good result before you decide it is deserving of a name, because there's already a flood of names of Haworthia hybrids, and a lot of them are very similar. It's incredible that I found many times that I've created hybrids that look very similar to those of Rennie Wong or George Theodorus, and I've used different parentage, and yet the results are so similar that it can almost go under the same name. So I would say wait for something really exceptional before you give it a name, to prevent the flood of names that already exist. And then also don't make it a ego thing. I mean, if you create a nice, exceptional hybrid, you did play a part in it, but I mean, to your plants, you are just one big pollinating insect. A lot of the credit goes to nature, because one can only steer things in that direction, but the final results are not entirely in your own hands.
And maybe actually that then kind of leads to my final point, which is how future generations pick up that expertise, pick up that depth of knowledge, pick up that interest, because it doesn't actually matter whether their interest is in the habitat or in species or in hybrids. It's how do they find a step
How do
into
they
this
find it?
world?
I mean, for me, you know, and I've already said that, you know, my passion and my interest really started by visiting a show. I know that you know they have some slightly different, shall we say, what the way in which they present the plants. You know, they don't have awards and whatever. They're more you know, just to display more artistically. Particularly they do that in America, particularly in California. But I see big shows in the Far East. I think it's important that, you know, if you like, societies and organizations around the world try and it's a face-to-face thing. You know, it's you know, showing what these plants really can look like, how you can display them, and then of course that leads on to how you grow them, how you look after them. It's just getting that information. I'm sure things like Facebook do a fantastic job, as long as it's organised correctly and freely. And probably, you know, it doesn't need to have too many controls, but it certainly needs to have some sort of governance of it. I think you know, it's everything. I mean, you know, everything seems to be going sort of digitally, or you know, into the, or what is it? Into the ether, I suppose. But from my own personal point of view, you know, the one thing that I reference all the time is the book. I can sit and read and look at a book, and get information from it. You know, I still, if a new book comes out on anything to do with probably natural history, sadly these days, because I'm passionate about butterflies. You know, certainly that's been a lifetime's interest in insects. You know, and of course that was one of the things, going back to artwork. I had a friend who again was interested at one time in Haworthia, but was a sort of world authority on invertebrates, and he got me to illustrate, do some illustrations for was, I think the book was called The Encyclopedia of Invertebrate Behavior. I mean, it was you know, it was one of the ones that you put under the leg that showed. It was a really big, thick book. But yeah, again, a passion, and I really got an awful lot of enjoyment out of doing those illustrations, because the illustration I had to do were the ones that he'd never been able to photograph.
Yeah.
So he'd seen it, but
Yeah.
was not in a position to photograph it. And then I had to describe. I think I always remember one instance where in our living room, I'd done an illustration of a praying mantis, but I got the leg wrong, and he's trying to describe how this praying mantis is standing. I should have photographed that as well, because that was comical, but I think
It's
that's
it's it's the I mean, it comes back to that passion. It's a passion for plants, Haworthias especially, but more as well, and a
yeah,
passion for art.
yeah.
Alan, it's been fantastic to talk to you about that passion throughout this call. Great to have spoken to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
A part of the answer is already in a question, and that is the word patience. In fact, two words come to mind, and those are patience and gratitude. There is a constant exchange between yourself and your plants of those two qualities. The plants are very patient, and they always react with maximum gratitude towards every of your actions that meet their needs. And of course, in return, they reward you with beauty and growth and productivity.